Hey, what's up, everyone? Before we get into this next episode, I want to give a quick shout out to one of the continued supporters of the podcast, being Seth Roy of North Mountain Goshawks. And if you haven't gotten your place on the list yet, put in your order for your new hunting partner for this next upcoming season, I highly recommend you get on the ball and do so. Your time is running very short at this point. Most birds are spoken for, and you'll just have to hit them up and see what's still available. But if you are in the market for a Finnish, Russian, or North American parent-reared goshawk, he is definitely the guy you want to hit up. So send him an email at ostringer3@gmail.com, fill out the information form at northmountaingoshawks.com, or send him a message on Facebook at North Mountain Goshawks and get on that list today. Now, on to this next episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast.
Internet's just kind of catching on. We didn't have phones like we do nowadays where I could just Google how to get rid of skunk spray, you know. And so I'd always heard tomato juice. Bill, being a little older and having a lot of hound years, he goes, that doesn't work. He goes, that won't work. And I've always heard that works. No, that won't work. He goes, the only thing I know that'll work is douche. And I said, like massengill douche? And he's like, yeah. And he goes, that's the only thing that'll cut the oil, you know? I said, okay. Well, at this point, I'm desperate. I'll try anything. And I had a girl there with me, a friend, you know? And I said, Casey, I need you to do me a favor. You need to go up to Walmart, and we need like a dozen bottles of massengill. She's like, I am not going through line with a dozen bottles of massengill. Sorry, you are on your own, you know?
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast. And if memory serves me correctly, I also need to wish everyone a happy Dachshund Day. And so the reason I'm putting out a bonus episode on this Friday, the 21st, is because when I looked it up, I believe that is the national designation for Dachshund Day. I don't know about the whole world, but anyway, I wanted to make sure to put out an extra bonus episode for this special occasion because we've had this ongoing series, which, I don't know, some of you might be getting tired of by now. Some of you are eating it up. I don't know. Either way, I felt it was necessary to release another nice long episode in which dachshunds are one of the main focal point topics, and I thought it would be a really nice occasion to also make the guest for this episode Thomas from BlackHawk Kennels. And there's probably a lot of you out there that have gotten dogs in the past from Paul, but I thought it would be good to have this episode today because Paul, whenever I did this recording with him, went really, really in depth on the history of dachshunds and falconry and how they got their start. And you'll hear Teddy and a couple other possibly familiar names mentioned in this episode, but he does a really good job outlining some of the earlier dogs that a lot of our modern day lines originated from, and talks a lot about that kind of stuff, and also more about the people who are credited for bringing these dogs out into the forefront and getting a lot of those early lines started. So this is another lengthy one. I hope you enjoy it. And once again, happy Dachshund Day, everybody. Here we go. Real quick, man, before we get started, cheers.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed the series on dachshunds so far, and hopefully I can offer a little insight on what I've gotten to witness over the years. I was fortunate enough to get into falconry at a young age, and I just kind of stumbled into this group of people like Teddy Moritz and Bill Bowler and these, you know, people that have had these dachshunds kind of from the beginning. I wish I could say I put a lot of research in and tried to find the best lines, but it was really just dumb luck that got me in originally. So
the thing I'm curious about most, I mean, just to kind of start off with is, how many years did you say you've been a falconer now? Has it been since you started?
So I got my first bird when I was 18.
Okay.
Read my first book on falconry at about 14. I grew up in a military family, and so I had to move every 3 years as a kid. To compound the problem, I was also an only child, and so every 3 years I was having to move. So I found that, you know, when you're starting over every 3 years, I found that a lot of my time was spent just out in the woods with my dog, my German Shepherd, doing, finding birds and tadpoles and turtles and bringing all kinds of random things home. I got into falconry a little bit one part by accident, and maybe another part little twist of fate. My parents were pretty supportive of my wildlife endeavors and bringing stuff home, but my mom always drew the line at snakes. So she didn't want any snakes in the house. And me and a good friend of mine, we had gone to the flea market and we had bought blowguns. We had $20 each. We were looking around and we realized, of course, when kids go to the flea market, first place they had is the weapons tables. We don't care about knickknacks and stuff, So we bought a couple blowguns once we realized that $20 was not nearly enough to buy crossbows or katanas or anything else cool, And so we were actually hunting rabbits with our blowguns. We got pretty good at them. But we had a problem. Every time we would shoot a rabbit, we had a little spot in the park with this log, and we would kind of sneak up behind the log with our blowguns, and we would wait for the rabbits to come out into the little field there, to eat grass, and we'd try to shoot them with our blowguns, but they would always run away on us. After we'd shoot them, they'd run away with the dart in them. And, we were just kind of dumb kids. We didn't realize that we just had practice darts and that we needed broadheads and stuff. So in our juvenile minds, we thought that the answer to our problem was we needed poison blow darts. And so my friend Randy convinced me that he could milk a cottonmouth if we caught one. So we got a peanut butter jar, and he had gotten some surgical gloves from his mom was a nurse, And so we had everything all set up, and we were going to try to milk a cottonmouth and poison our blow darts, thinking that this was going to help us somehow shoot rabbits. And the problem was, like I said, my mom drew the line at snakes. So my mom found the snake that we had found. We had it in a little 5-gallon bucket. And so needless to say, she was not too happy about that. And I got grounded from all my wildlife. She made me let go of all my turtles, let go of my tadpoles, all my salamanders. Everything had to go. She just let me keep my dog, basically. And so I thought, okay, I knew I was in some trouble, but I thought after like 2 or 3 months, things would blow over and I'd try to sneak a turtle in, or I'd find a salamander. I'd try to sneak home, and she wouldn't relent. She's like, nope, get it out of the house, And so at the time, I was doing a report in school on ecology, and I just needed pictures for like a food diagram, the predators at top and then prey animals in the middle and grass or whatever at the bottom. And so I'd Googled things like tigers and owls and hawks, just looking for some pictures. And I came across a book called Introduction to Modern Falconry. I didn't know what falconry was, had never heard of it. And as I'm flipping through this page, looking for pictures of hawks to just Xerox so I can do this report, I'm noticing that in every photo I go to, there's guy's got a hawk on his arm. There's always a guy in the picture with a hawk on his arm. I'm like, what is this book? So I kind of start flipping through it, and I end up checking the book out. Read the whole thing probably in the first week that I had it, and I knew at that moment someday, this was when I was about 14 or 15, someday I was going to be a falconer. Didn't know how long it was going to take, didn't know how I was going to get into it, but it resonated with me enough to know that at that time I was like, someday I'm going to do this, But I had one big obstacle, which was my mom, who would not let me even have a turtle or a tadpole at this point, So I ended up, like a lot of us, I think, do, at least back then, pre-internet, ended up keeping the book and just had to, with great disappointment in myself, had to report to the library that I had lost the book, and gladly paid them the $9.95 to keep the book, and read it over and over a couple months. And I think my mom sort of realized that my interest in falconry, because I was one of those kids, like a lot of kids, I'd get into something, do that for a couple months, get into something else. But I think she kind of realized it was not going away. And so I asked her, finally, after about 6 months, I asked her, Mom, if I did all this stuff, where you had to take a test and you have to get a sponsor and, all the things required, you think you'd let me get a hawk? And she kind of thought it over. And I think she didn't think I'd ever get that far, because like I said, I was one of those kids that just was kind of, pick something up, put something down, kind of thing. But she said, yeah, if you did all that stuff, I'd probably let you get a hawk. And so then I had my excuse to get another animal, so ended up studying. It didn't take me too long, about 3 years. This was pre-internet, so it was a little tough studying back then. Didn't have a lot of resources like we do nowadays, but ended up passing my test. And then I apprenticed under a guy named Mike Gibson. And so I knew Mike for I was probably a third-year general. And we had hunted for 2 or 3 years together. And he calls me one day, And it was a new hunting season, and I was kind of excited to talk to him because I was already 10 squirrels in. Back then, I'd like to hunt squirrels. I really wanted to hunt rabbits, but I didn't think we had many rabbits, didn't know how to find rabbits, really. Squirrels, in Michigan, you can pretty much go into any woodlot and find squirrels, And so I had about 10 squirrels for the season. So when he called me, I was like, yeah, I'm already got like 10 squirrels for the season. He goes, that's it? He goes, I've caught 18 rabbits in the last 2 weeks. And I'd known Mike about 3 years, and he was he was a very jovial person, very, had a great sense of humor, but he never struck me as a liar. But I remember thinking at that time, like 18 rabbits in 2 weeks, that seemed a little outlandish because I'd known in past years he'd maybe caught 30, 40 rabbits in a season. And so how do you catch 18 rabbits in 2 weeks? He goes, you got to see this new dog I got. I said, okay. I said, well, what kind of dog did you get? And he goes, just come up this weekend and I'll show it to you. I was like, you're not going to tell me what kind you got? No, just come up this weekend. And I thought that was kind of weird, And so all that week I'm thinking, going through the usual suspects. Maybe you got a beagle. Maybe you got a Vizsla. Maybe you got a hound dog of some sort, So I get over to his house, and he comes out, and he's got this big smile on his face. He's got this little box, and he sets it down on the ground. He goes, look at this. And he opens it up, and a little wired-haired dachshund comes running out. And I said, what's that, a baggie for your hawk? Like, what are we going to do with that? And he goes, and he looked legitimately offended when I said that. And he goes, that's the best rabbit dog you've ever seen in your life. I was like, really? And as he's saying this, there's a leaf blowing across his lawn, and a little dachshund's chasing. I was like, oh yeah, I see what you mean. That looks like a very fierce dog, as he's chasing the leaf across the lawn, And, so we get the dog, and he goes, well, you just got to see it work, So we go out in the field, and we're beating down this line, and we jumped a couple rabbits, and they headed straight down the line towards what I knew to be this big rabbit fortress. It was a bunch of rolled brush piles, logs. We had never gotten a rabbit out once it had gotten into there. You could get on it, jump on it all day. You're not moving this thing, So I'm like, all right, well, I was like, well, let's head that way. I know there's more over there. He goes, hold on, we're going to get this one. Meanwhile, as he's saying that, the dog's working its way up, and it gets to where the rabbit had run and starts voicing a little, and its pace is picking up, and it's going down towards the line, So we start following after it. And sure enough, we get down to this, it's probably about 10 feet wide, 30 feet long of just rolled brush pile and logs and stuff. And the little dog goes in, and we're sitting there waiting for a little while, and we could hear it barking down inside the pile. And all of a sudden, a rabbit comes out, busting out of the pile, runs maybe about 30, 40 feet. The hawk goes down and catches it. And so he goes running over to his hawk. And then meanwhile, bam, bam, 2 more rabbits come out of this pile. And I'm going, ho, ho, ho. But then I realized, well, we don't have any more birds in the air. But I was excited about that. It really got me going. I'm like, man, that dog is really something, because we had never gotten a rabbit out of this pile once they had gotten to that. And so we hawked a little bit longer, and dog goes down a hole, and we could hear it down inside the hole. And then, we hear a rabbit squealing, and this dog, all of a sudden you see the tail coming out, and the dog actually pulled the rabbit out of the hole by its leg, So Mike grabs that rabbit, puts it in his bag, and we work on a little bit further. Another brush pile situation, jumped another rabbit. And by this point, I'm really impressed with this dog. We'd been out in about an hour, caught 3 rabbits. And so I remember saying to Mike, I was like, man, that is really something, Mike. I was like, that really is an amazing dog. He goes, you want one, don't you? I said, well, I live in an apartment. I have a roommate. I said, I don't think I'm ready for a dog right now, but if I were to ever get a dog for falconry, I'm convinced that that's the breed I would get. And so a couple months had gone by. We're still hawking. I'm going over seeing this dog occasionally. And meanwhile, I'm hunting squirrels because that's when I knew how to hunt back then. And about 2 months went by, and he calls me, and he goes, you still want a dog? I got one for you right now. And I was like, whoa, I didn't realize I'd ever said I wanted a dog. I really didn't want one at the time. I wasn't in a position. I was only like 22 years old, and lived in an apartment, had roommates, college years type of thing, And I said, I wasn't really ready for a dog. He goes, well, they're not easy to get. I have one for you right now. If you want to get it, all you have to do is go down and pick it up. So at any rate, he said, well, they're not easy to get. I have one you can get right now if you want it. And he goes, you just got to go down and pick it up. And so I was like, thought about it for a couple of days. I talked to my roommate. Hey, man, what would you think if I got this little dog, And he was fine with it. So I said, all right. I said, so he gave me the phone number to a guy down in Mishawaka, Indiana. And he said, just go down to this guy and, you can pick up the dog. So it's like, all right. So a couple of weeks have gone by. I went down and I was going to pick up this dog. And I meet the guy. His name was Bill Bowler. I didn't know him at the time, but he takes me out back. And he goes, well, there she is. And he's got a full-grown female wire hair out there. And he goes, that's the one I got for sale. That's your dog. I said, oh. I said, okay. And I think he kind of read the apprehension on my face a little bit. He goes, what's the matter? You don't want her? I said, well, I do. I said, but I thought for some reason I was coming down here to get a puppy. I didn't know she was full grown. And I said I was kind of hoping for a male, just because I live in an apartment and had no interest in breeding at that point. So I didn't want to have to deal with some of the feminine issues of a female dog. But the big issue was it was a year old. And it had been an outdoor dog. And so, you know how those can be, potty training a dog that's never been potty trained after a year. And I didn't even know the dachshund's reputation at that point for potty training. And so he kind of thought about it for a minute. He goes, He goes, well, I wasn't really going to sell any of these. He goes, but I do have some puppies. And so he takes me kind of around back in a little hidden spot that he had back in the back. And there's a female long hair back there. She's got 3 puppies. And he says, well, there's 2 males and a female. The female's not for sale. He said, but I'll make you the same deal. You can pick from one of the males. But if I let you have one of these dogs, I want to be able to breed to it at least one time for free. I said, okay. I said, I had no interest in breeding at that point. I said, honestly, I just want a male and a puppy. You can breed to it as many times as you want. I don't really care. You can stud to them anytime you want, you know. He's like, okay. So he let me pick between the 2 males. So I picked out my dog. And he goes, the only catch is if I let you have one of these dogs, I can't breed to it unless it's a field champion. And so you have to agree that you will come to these field trials and finish the dog. That way he's a field champion and then I can breed to him. I said, all right. I said, well, I don't know anything about that, but if you, I can promise you I'll bring him. And I can't promise she's going to become a field champion, though I don't know. And he says, well, you just promise you'll bring him, and I can promise he'll become a field champion. And I was thinking about that as I was leaving, and I was like, well, I guess everybody likes to think they have the best dogs, you know. I was like, that's a pretty bold statement. You know, for AK, never been to an AKC trial, but you assume AKC, they got, some of the best dogs in the country, And so, as I was leaving, I was like, I guess everybody likes to think they have the best stuff. I was like, that's a pretty bold statement, but, whatever. So, maybe 6 or 8 months went by. Didn't hear from Bill anymore, And honestly, I just kind of forgot about this old hippie from South Bend, And he calls me out of the blue about 8 months later. He goes, hey, there's a field trial in Illinois this weekend. Are you going to go? I said, I didn't know anything about it. I said, but it's kind of short notice. This was like a Wednesday, and the field trial's on a Saturday. I said, I didn't know anything about it. I said, but I guess we made a deal, so I'll go, He's like, all right. So he gives me the address, and it's about a 5-hour drive over to Roscoe, Illinois, And I told him, I said, I've been doing some rabbit drags around the yard with just a bloody rabbit leg. I didn't even have a whole carcass. I just had a bloody leg like you'd feed to your hawk, I said, he's been doing good on that. And I didn't realize at the time how good he was because I'd never seen any of the competition, but he was running like 100, 200-yard lines around my apartment complex, finding this little bloody stump of a rabbit leg. And so I got there Friday night and we went out. You were able to practice occasionally at some of these trials. Back then we were allowed to practice. So this dog had never seen a live rabbit until that Friday night before the field trial. And we took him out and he was doing good. He was, had his nose down and he was running some lines. And again, I didn't know really what I had at that point just because I'd never seen what the competition looked like or other dachshunds around the country. So I didn't know how good he was or wasn't, And I told Bill, I said, well, I don't know what I'm doing. So I think on tomorrow, I just kind of want to watch and see how everybody does it, handles their dogs and how all that works. He goes, just enter them. I said, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to mess them up or anything, He goes, just enter them. I'll even pay your entry fee. I was like, well, it's not that. I just don't know what I'm doing. So he talks me into entering the dog and kind of just giving me a quick crash course on how to release them and stuff. And that first Saturday out of 27 dogs, my dog got MBQ. And so in my mind, I'm like, wow, that's 5th place. No points or anything, but my dog beat 22 other dogs, And then on Sunday, out of a few dogs had gone home, and out of 22 dogs, my dog got 2nd place. And so I was really ecstatic, leaving my first field trial. Now I'm realizing, I actually do really have a good dog here, because I'm seeing some of the competition. And so I remember thinking on the way home, I thought back to those words he said, you just promise you'll bring the dog. I could promise he'll become a field champion, you know. So I guess he wasn't kidding, you know. So in the next 2 trials, Roman got first place in both the next 2 trials, finished in 3 trials essentially with 2 firsts and a second and an MBQ. And so that sparked my love for these dogs. Obviously, the first season, my head count doubled on rabbits. I actually started hunting rabbits because I could start finding them. My dog would start finding them. And I guess it just kind of went from there. A couple of years went by, and me and Bill had started becoming friends. He was about 25 years older than me, so there's kind of a big age gap there. But I think he realized I was really into the dogs. I was a good student at the time because even though I'd been in falconry for about 5 years, rabbits was always what I wanted to hunt. I was only hunting squirrels because that's what I could find. And so pretty quickly I realized that in terms of rabbit hunting, he was on a different level than anything I'd seen at meets and stuff.
So real quick, just to clarify and so how many years then officially had you been in whenever you got your first dachshund?
I was a third year general.
Okay.
So I'd gone through my apprenticeship and a few years of my general's license.
Gotcha. Okay. I was just curious. I couldn't remember what the timeline was on it. Go ahead and continue.
Yep. So over the next year or 2, I ended up getting another dog, a female from him. And I honored my agreement with him and let him breed to Roman a couple times. And I think because I honored that agreement and we started kind of becoming friends and I started going down and hawking with him. And I realized pretty quickly he was just on another level from other falconers that I had met at field trials and stuff. I'd go down to his house. I might go to the Michigan Hawking Club and maybe the whole club would catch 5 squirrels and 3 rabbits or something over a weekend. I'd go down to his house and him and his friend Rich would catch 18, 20 rabbits over the same amount of time. So I started going down there more frequently because at that time, rabbits was what I always wanted to hunt. With a hawk, it beats killing them with blow darts,
yeah, I'm sure.
know? And so I was a good student and I just really started kind of picking his brain. And I think he recognized my passion, and he's only had, to my knowledge, 2 apprentices in his whole life. He's generally, like a lot of falconers, a little bit of a loner and just likes to hunt with his little group and stuff. So I really appreciated that he would kind of take me under his wing and start showing me some of this stuff. I guess the point I was getting to was after a couple of years, though, I did a couple breedings my own from Roman and then the dog that I got from him. And I produced a male that I called Blue out of breeding from Roman and Wim. And he had asked to breed Blue to a dog named Sunny, which was Roman's sister. So it was kind of a aunt to nephew breeding. But that breeding ended up producing a fairly famous dog in falconry named Turk. A lot of people, when they're looking for dachshunds, they're kind of looking for that Turk in the background. You know, he and really this was to Teddy's credit because Turk was a great dog. I was the low guy on the totem pole though, and his drive was just on another level, and we weren't hip to e-collars back then. So being the young guy in the group and sort of the quote-unquote apprentice, even though I wasn't an apprentice, I was usually tasked with running him down. And so I was not a big fan of Turk, really, because, you know, there was a couple days I wanted to bring him down with a shotgun, you know, because he just would not stop. And like I said, we weren't hip to e-collars. And Bill tells this story a little bit better, but I guess he had sent Turk out east, and Teddy had bred a couple of her bitches to him. And then he had come back out to us. And over the course of the next year or 2, some of these Turk-sired puppies were growing up, and they were really doing good things out there. They were winning a lot of trials and really, you know, doing phenomenal work. And so Teddy had called Bill, and she said, "Are you interested in selling that dog?" And Bill's like, "Well, I don't know." She goes, and I think this is the price. I don't want to quote exactly, but I think she said, "Well, I'll give you $1,000 for the dog." And to hear Bill tell the story is funny because he goes, you know, at that point, I was a little over Turk because he was just so much in the field. He would have been a perfect dog for someone like Casey. One dog with a goshawk on the fist. But the way we're hunting with a cast of Harris Hawks and 2 or 3 dogs, he was always up 100 yards past us, jumping all the rabbits out in front of us while us and the Hawks and the other dogs are back here working. I mean, he's just tearing up the whole field. And so Bill was kind of a lot of days he was chaotic and interfered with our hawking. I mean, you had to respect how good he was. Like I said, he'd be up 100 yards just jumping rabbits left and right, but that does us no good back here when the hawks and the dogs are all back here. And so Bill, it's funny to tell him or hear him tell the story because he goes, I was really kind of over Turk, but it occurred to me that if he was worth $1,000 to Teddy, he might just be worth $1,000 to me too, you know? And so, so he turned Teddy down on that first offer. And I think a couple weeks later or something, she had called back and she said, how about $1,000 and I'll give you a puppy out of a breeding we just did. And so that was sweetened the deal enough. He's all right, sold, you know, and sent her back out there. And then Teddy took him around the country, campaigned him. So she really made him famous. If it hadn't been for Teddy, no one probably would have known who Turk was. And we're grateful that she did, you know, because she campaigned him and really made him famous. And now a lot of people are looking, you know, for that in the bloodline. You know, Turk is one of the dogs anyway that a lot of people are kind of want to see in the background. And so that was all her doing, making him famous. But for me as a young guy, I felt like, oh, cool. I have a little claim to that because that was my dog my stud that I had bred. And even though Bill was technically the breeder because he had the female, you know, I felt, oh, cool. I had a little part in that, you know. So, and actually there was a falconer, Joe Custella. I believe he's in New Jersey. He's over on the East Coast. He was wise. He had Turk for a while. After Teddy had him for a while, she had bred him. And somehow he ended up with Joe Custella. And he was wise enough because of how that dog ran. He was always just, you know, yick, and, you know, way up ahead and busting rabbits. And he goes, man, I'm going to lose this dog. I mean, he was a lot of dog in the field. And so he had the wisdom to strip the dog before. He's like, he told me his thinking was, I better strip this dog before I lose this dog. And so he got the dog stripped. And he sat on Turk semen for about 10 or 15 years. And then just a couple years ago, he had reached out to me and he was looking for a female that was already started that he could just go in the field and hunt with. I was like, well, I really don't know if I have anything like that right now. But he mentioned Turk semen. And so I was like, well, maybe I do. And so it was hard parting with the dog that I parted with, but I traded him. And we have a little bit of Turk semen that we're going to be reincorporating into the line over the next few years once we get the right breeding. And so just a shout out to Joe. Thank you for that, because it was nice to see some of that semen come home and be able to say after 15 years of, you know, hey, these are first Turk puppies to touch the ground in 15 years, you know.
Yeah.
So.
No, I mean, yeah. And it's important for people to know that there's a lot of history with this breed. People have already heard the episode with Teddy and stuff, and she was able to touch on a little bit of that and everything. But that was one of the reasons why I'm glad that you decided to make the trip down today, was because I could tell that whenever we talked on the phone for the first time, that this was something that you were pretty passionate about and pretty... you enjoyed talking about, you know, when it comes to a lot of the background and a lot of the history of, you know, not just necessarily the breed itself, but more of its origins in falconry here in the States, and kind of the role that everybody played, and you know, kind of putting that emphasis on, you know, hey, this really only started with just a couple or a few, you know, handful of original dogs and stuff, and you know, not to get too far off track with, you know, kind of the original train of thought here, but go ahead and just and outline that history in a little bit more detail then,
sure.
and just kind of talk a little bit about, like, even though it doesn't really seem like that long ago in a way, you know, comparatively
20
speaking,
years is not that long.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, it's funny though how many different generations, or, you know, different, you know, forks in the pedigree come from just a few dogs. So you can go ahead and outline that a little bit if you want.
So we all owe something to somebody at some point. So we give a lot of credit to Teddy. She pioneered these dogs into falconry. And I was fortunate enough, I was coming in right at the time. Teddy had already been well known for her wire hairs for years and years before that. And this is all pre-internet. And she was already pretty famous as a falconer and a author and a houndswoman. Before I came in, but it was mostly revolved around her wire hairs at that point. And so I was fortunate I came in right as she was getting out of the wire hairs and getting into these long hair lines. And so like I said, we all owe something to somebody. So I'll give a little honorable mention to a guy named Chuck Sprung. That was who Teddy got her first long hairs from. And Chuck was kind of an interesting guy. He was a little bit boisterous. The best way I heard him described was by a lady named Sherry Faust. Sherry Faust is a blood tracker And for a lot of years, she had the only dachshund to ever go over 3,000 lifetime field champion points. Very good dog named Danica, and she was a little bit of a famous dachshund for a while. I think there's one dog that might have passed her now, but she had the best description of Chuck Sprung. He could have 3 dogs running for absolute. If people don't know at home, in AKC trials, you have essentially 4 classes. You have open dogs and open bitches. They divide them by sex. And open dogs are dogs that are not field champions yet. They're trying to become field champions. And then you have field champions, which are dogs that have already finished, and they run off against each other, and they divide those into males and females. And so there's 4 classes, and in over the course of a field trial, there's 4 first places that are handed out. 1 for open dog, 1 for open female, 1 for field champion dog, and 1 for field champion female. And then once those 4 first places are handed out, they'll run the winning open male against the winning open female, and whoever wins that gets what's called best of open. And then they will run the winning field champion bitch with the winning field champion stud, and whoever wins that gets best of field champions. And then they'll run the open dog against whoever won the opens against the field champion. Whoever wins that wins what's called absolute best dog at the trial of that day. Essentially, you beat every other dog, or you beat the dog that beat every other dog. And so the best description I ever heard of Chuck was he could have 3 dogs running for a trio, and he would once it was over, he would ask the judges, well, why didn't the other 2 win? Because he liked this dog better for one or whatever reason. Why didn't that dog win? He was never happy just winning the absolute. He wanted to know why his other dogs didn't win out of the 3 that he had in there. So that was kind of his personality, I think, in a nutshell. And for years, Chuck would not sell his long hair lines to anybody. And his thinking, I think, behind it was he just did not want to run against his own lines. He was very successful in field trialing, and he didn't want to run against his own dogs in field trials because it was all he did when he retired. Him and his wife would just travel around the country running dogs. And at that time, Teddy had some of the best wire hairs in the country, probably the best wire hairs in the country. And Chuck also had wire hairs. And again, this stuff is kind of as I remember it. Some of it's a little bit urban legend. If Teddy or Bill has a little bit different story to this, then I defer to them, whatever theirs. This is just kind of how I remember things going. But Teddy was the first person to kind of crack Chuck. Teddy's got a very pragmatic way of speaking. And I think Chuck maybe realized he had met his match when he was talking to Teddy, and so she was the first one to kind of crack the code on how to get a dog from him. And I'm not sure if this is exactly right, but if the way I understand it was, I think he wanted to breed to her wire hair line, and perhaps she wanted a long hair from him in return, but he didn't, I guess, want to do that so much. So rather than holding him over the coals, she's just, okay, here, you can breed to this dog. And I think he maybe appreciated that she wasn't very pushy for his lines. And also, I think he might have realized, because he died about a year or 2 after I met him, and he was already an older guy, and maybe he realized his kids weren't into the dachshunds that much. And I think maybe he saw Teddy as a good vessel to carry on his lines. I mean, you could hardly ask for a better steward for your dachshund lines than Teddy Moritz, And so whatever the case was, somehow she'd gotten the first long hairs away from him through whatever deal they made. And Bill Bowler, he was kind of, I guess, Teddy's contemporary in the Midwest. The style of hunting that she's kind of made famous with the dachshunds and hunting rabbits, Bill was early onto that ship. And when I first met Bill, him and Rich. So just if anybody doesn't know, BlackHawk Kennels is made up of 3 people. Bill Bowler was the patriarch. He's the one that started the kennels. Myself, I kind of became part of it when we did the Turk breeding. And as I was running puppies, I didn't have my own kennel name, and I just looked at all these dogs as Bill's dogs. And so when I was running them, I'd just be like, well, do you care if I just put your kennel name on them? Because, it was just kind of a side thing for me at that time. And it was probably the smartest thing I ever did, because that kind of tied me in with BlackHawk. Now all my dogs are BlackHawk too. And really, I'm just running them under Bill's kennel name. But as time went on, it sort of turned, particularly after Turk was bred. I think we both realized that the big advantage we had was I could breed these lines a couple generations. He could breed these lines a couple generations. Eventually, his friend Richard Hoof, who's also a part of BlackHawk, they had been friends for 20 or 30 years. They had raised Dobermans together, but Rich started getting dachshunds. And so we kind of realized as a group, we could keep more dogs than one of us could by ourselves. I might be limited to 5 dogs. Bill might be limited to 5 or 6 dogs. Same with Rich. But between the 3 of us, we could keep a stable of 15 or 18 dogs. We could use each other to breed to, so we never really had to go outside of the line for an outcross. We had a big enough genetic pool with 15 or 18 dogs that we could line breed them. I'd breed a couple generations. Hey, I need a stud. Bill just bred a stud out of this. Hey, that lines up pretty good. And so it essentially was a way to line breed without, getting any outcrosses, and we could just use each other's for that. So just in case anybody didn't know, BlackHawk is actually made up of 3 people. Bill being the patriarch, and he was the one with the vision for smaller dogs. But back a little bit to the history. So Teddy got a dog named Steffi from Chuck, and I think that was her first, if I'm not mistaken, her first long hair line, or
the one that she discussed in the podcast.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that dog was out on the East Coast. And then Bill got a dog from Chuck, which was kind of brokered through Teddy. Technically he got it from Chuck, but Teddy kind of put her stamp on it, named Charlie. And the problem they were running into, they had a couple good females from Chuck's line, but the problem they were running into was to breed any of those dogs, the second best long hair lines were so mediocre compared to what Chuck's long hair lines were. They just weren't worth breeding to, I think, is the general consensus. And so Teddy, along with her friend Susan Fuller, started looking for an import. And Susan, I believe, did a lot of the research on this, and they found a dog in Belgium called Ice for short. It was Jazebrand van Neerjik was his name, but everybody called him Ice. And so what he offered really was just good imported genetics. I think most people agree. I've never seen Ice, and so I don't like to talk about dogs that I haven't seen firsthand. But I think the general consensus was a lot of the best hunting qualities that we see these days came kind of from Chuck's side. But Ice just offered good coat and good suitable genetics that you could actually start getting a foundation of puppies that could then be, bred together. And so Bill had Charlie, and he sent Charlie out, and that had Charlie bred to Ice. And so essentially all the dachshunds that you see in falconry today came from those first 2 or 3 breedings. And from there, Bill and Teddy would keep puppies, and then those would start getting bred, and Bill might send a puppy over to me, and now he's got that close. Because anybody who knows, I'm sure Teddy's the same way. When you start breeding, you want to, the good, you can't keep them all, but you want to put those good puppies that you think have a lot of potential with people close by, so you still have access to them, and I think that's kind of how I got my foothold in. I think I was really just a pawn at first, a good place to put dogs and that they could trust and know that they could breed back to. And then I just kind of got to, over the years, that evolved and then into a partnership with Bill. And now Bill, he's still very involved in some of the breedings. We bounce a lot of stuff off of him, but he's more or less not so much on the breeding side of things. And he's kind of left that to me and Rich nowadays, but he's still very involved in the overall plan. But, he's about 70 years old now, so he doesn't have a stable of 8-10 dogs like he used to. He just lets me and Rich breed them. And
Yeah. I mean, I that sounds very involved, and that's the one common thing that I always think personally whenever I have these conversations with guys, especially men or women who are very heavy into the breeding world and have their own kennels and things like that is, good Lord. I mean, it's got to be a lot of work probably just keeping track of all of these different lines. So, technically which dog is kosher to technically breed with another dog and this, that, and the other. And that's one different little avenue that I want to take in this conversation that I haven't had yet in the Dachshund series is, I mean, what lengths do you go to make sure that there's not too much in the way of too serious inbreeding and all this stuff? Because as you said, I mean, all of these dachshunds that are floating around nowadays have some kind of almost genetic tie to the same, handful of dogs. So, I mean, where do you generally kind of draw the line then with how you match up these different breeding pairs and stuff?
It's an interesting topic because I think most AKC people feel like grandfather to granddaughter is good line breeding. So most people, they want to breed a dog and then they'll take that puppy, they'll breed that again. And then that puppy that comes out of that, they'll go back to the grandfather. Sorry, I'm tapping on the table there. And so I think most people generally agree like grandfather to granddaughter or grandmother to grandson is what most people consider to be good ethical line breeding, right? But there's a couple ways to look at that. If you look at the pedigrees back during the like 50s and 60s, before TV was real popular, video games, men particularly, what they did and with their free time was they hunted and they fished and they did outdoor activities. And if you look, sometimes you go to these beagle clubs and you can find books of pedigrees that go back to those days, 50s and 60s. And if you look at them, you're kind of hard pressed to find dogs that weren't like father-daughter breedings, brother-sister breedings. But the weird thing about it is some of the best dogs that ever touched the ground came out of that era because, like I said, people didn't have much other to do. And so a lot of people really focused on these breedings and, they were hunting, outdoorsmen, sportsmen. And so they would, from an ethical standpoint, you look at it and be like, man, like it's hard to not find dogs that are what most people consider inbred,
Well, and not to cut you off, but I mean, I do understand that that's kind of where the whole purebred concept, like I understand that there's a certain amount of it that has gone on or continues to some degree to go on. Otherwise, it wouldn't be like a technically like a quote unquote purebred line or breed anymore or whatever.
Right.
But that being said, I mean, there's certain.
It's a fine line.
There's a certain point where things aren't right. You know
right.
what I mean?
Yep. Bill had an interesting point, though. He said, with dogs, now keep in mind these are domesticated dogs, so you got to be a little bit more careful. But just in generally speaking, like wolves and coyotes, whoever the alpha is, he's breeding everybody, whether it be his sister, his daughter, his grandmother, his mother, whoever the head dog in that group is, whether it's coyotes or wolves, he's got access to all the females. And so I think we tend to put our ethical thing as people onto the dogs, which they don't have those ethics, Now you're dealing with domesticated dogs. So, we're a long way from wolves. So, obviously you got to be careful. But that's where I feel like for us, having that bigger genetic pool, we're able to stay within the lines. And even now, like I did a breeding with Paul and Philalia. So for anybody out there, I think you guys have covered this a little bit. But what we're kind of known for at BlackHawk is Bill early on locked into that the magic of these dachshunds, their noses are great and their noses have always been there since Teddy got them from Chuck and Teddy bred them. But the magic is their ability to flush Corey out of tight places. And so Bill kind of locked in early that the nose was already there. And so where a lot of people would breed the best tracking dog to the best tracking dog, Bill kind of right from jump would breed the smallest dog to the smallest dog. I think me and Rich kind of drug our feet a little bit on that. We're a little more like Teddy. Teddy wants a well-rounded dog. She wants the right build, the right nose, the right coat, the right size, all that. So she's trying to, I kind of describe breeding as like trying to hold 5 slinkies in your hand at one time, and each one might represent coat, one might represent nose, one might represent size, one might represent build, one might represent drive. And so as you breed for one and that slinky kind of falls out of your hand and you put it back up there and it knocks the other slinky down. And so it's like trying to hold 5 slinkies in your hand. The idea is to get all 5 slinkies into one dog where they have all those qualities. And I think that's how Teddy generally approaches it. Bill kind of threw everything at size. So, like I said, the nose was already there. And that's something that's important that we breed for. But Bill's smallest dog to smallest dog, he realized that we needed to get smaller. And I think me and Rich, we're kind of more like Teddy. We're like, well, small is good, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. But Bill just got fixated on size. And it turns out it was great that he did that because as the dogs got smaller and smaller, our bag count went up and up. I mean, it was just a natural fact that as we got smaller, we caught more rabbits, And so Paul and Philalia, which were Teddy Maritz's apprentices, I think they kind of took the approach where they threw everything at nose, right? Size didn't matter too much. Drive is always important, but, coat, all that stuff. But they wanted to breed the best tracking dog to the best tracking dog. And so they've done that for about 20 years. And we bred small size for about 20 years. And I think Teddy has bred well-rounded everything for about 20 years, or longer. And so what's interesting now is, even though a couple of years ago I did a breeding with Paul and Phil where we took my main field dog Judge and went to one of Paul Aaliyah's dogs, Luna, and we got some puppies. They kept one called Iris, and we kept one called Jersey, and it was really interesting to bring those two lines back together. And even that is technically line breeding because for 20 years they've bred the same way we do. They didn't do very many outcrosses. They're staying within that line, those original Moritz lines or Chuck Sprung lines, that were brokered into Falconry through Teddy. And we did the same for size. And so now it's interesting to be able to bring those back together. And I think it was funny because one of the things they said is, man, we really love how this dog looks. Your guys' dog has added a lot of confirmation to our dogs. And it was funny because we thought the same thing. We're like, man, I really love how our dogs look now. They've added a lot of confirmation to ours. So I think I always say our dogs I don't think they're winning any beauty contests because we focus on field stuff. But I will say this, just as a little side story. We were at a field trial once, and like I said, our dogs, I don't think they're ever going to win any beauty contests. The AKC standard is a little different than what we breed for. If you heard Teddy talk, she wants a dog that looks like a little fox, very athletic, long-legged, narrow chest. And this is kind of what we have found to be ideal too, but that doesn't really fit with the standard, that AKC has. They want shorter legs, a little more deeper chest. And so we've always thought our dogs are kind of ugly, and we've never entered them in show because we have field dogs. But there was a lady at a field trial, this was probably about 5 years ago, she came up to us and she had this thick German accent. And she comes up and she goes, boy, those are some good looking dogs. I can't do the German accent, but she said, boy, those are some good looking dogs. And I thought, really? That's the first time anybody's ever said that, And she explained that Americans tend to exaggerate everything. So when they read in the German standard that a dog should have sufficient enough chest to breathe easily underground, what Americans hear is big barrel chest. Or when the German standard says the legs should be short enough to easily allow movement within holes. What Americans hear is short, stubby legs. And so she said, we have a tendency to exaggerate things over here. And so she goes, in Germany, for a hunting dog, that's exactly what you want them to look like. So we took that as a great compliment, because she's from Germany. I don't know who she was. I don't know if she knew anything, but the German accent sold me. Like, she must know what she's talking about. And so that was kind of interesting. And one of the things, if you look at our Facebook page, I have a picture up there. It's an illustration from the 1800s of dachshunds about 200 years ago. And they look very similar to the dogs that we breed in Falconry, that Teddy breeds, that we breed. They look like little foxes, longer legs. And when I saw that illustration for the first time, it indicated to me that we were on the right track, because the difference between nowadays and 250 years ago is 250 years ago, they were using those dogs day in and day out to hunt. It was part of their livelihood, for putting food on the table and stuff. And so I look at it like, back then they were actually using them how they're supposed to be used every single day. And they came up with the same general shape and concept that we've come up as falconers with today, under the same circumstances. I mean, we, outside of the standard, we're just breeding for what we feel like works the best in the field. And it turns out to be very similar to what they had 200 or 300 years ago. The American AKC standard set aside, it's very similar to what they were using 200 or 300 years ago. I think this illustration happened to be from France, somewhere in Europe. But I thought that was very telling, because they were using these dogs for what they're supposed to be. And the dogs in that illustration, it's just a drawing, but they had longer legs, they had narrow chests, they looked like little foxes, like Teddy describes them. So that was kind of an interesting side note, from that lady coming saying, yeah, boy, those are good looking dogs. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that. But so,
yeah, well, I mean, yeah. And like I said, it's everybody's views of what makes a good dog. And, I mean, there's so much like subjective type stuff with a lot of this. And it's funny because, someone, like you said, might look at one dog and be like, yeah, that looks like an amazing dog, whatever. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to amount to anything in the field, and vice versa. But I mean, I have noticed that what people value is important over other aspects of the whole conformation thing. It's very widely varying.
I think a lot of it comes down to terrain that you're in and that you're hunting. Our dogs are very specialized for cottontails in the Midwest, Canada, and probably out east. But essentially for us, we have a lot of woodchucks. And so we hunt a lot of urban hunting. So we need dogs that can get into those tight places, whether it be a woodchuck hole or under a shed or in a brush pile, into drains, pipes. We hunt a lot of urban hawking. If you go out west where you're hunting jackrabbits, a 12 or 15 pound dog with a little longer leg might be more valuable than a little 6-pound dog like what we breed. But it seems like Canada and the Midwest, Ohio, Illinois, Wisconsin, like that Pennsylvania, that general area, it's kind of mecca for hounds. Anyways, some of the best beagles in the country come from this area: Ohio, Illinois, Indiana.
Terriers in general.
Terriers, yeah. We have a lot of cottontails,
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. And squirrels. Yeah.
And that's one of the things, I never travel too much more than like 5 hours for a field trial. We'll go over to Wisconsin occasionally, and we'll go down to Ohio or Indiana, but we don't generally have to go like clear out west, because if you can be successful at field trials in this region, you're going against some of the best competition in the country. So if your dogs are performing well here, they'll probably perform well anywhere. But I think that a lot of that just comes down to what you're hunting. And like anything, you need the right tool for the job. So for us in Michigan and this general area, the right tool is very small. Out in California or Arizona, the right tool might be a little longer and more tracking, ability,
Sure. Well, and like I said, I know that everybody's kind of got differing opinions and different views on what they view is important for their specific situation and all that. But I mean, yeah, I mean, that was for the most part, a good general overview of, some of the different history, and then some of the different, just the viewpoints on the lines and everything else. But I mean, at this point, just to kind of summarize and kind of finish the train of thought as far as just the different lines and the whole, inbreeding topic and everything. I mean, with the breeders that are out there today, and with the different variations and all the different dogs that have been produced over these last, several decades or whatever, I mean, what do you personally think the status of the pool to draw from really is? I mean, do you see this line continuing to flourish and still have what it needs as far as the diversity aspect of things?
I actually really do. And here's an interesting caveat to that is outcrosses are great for genetic diversity, but you can also bring in some things into the line that you maybe didn't want in there, and so we haven't embarked every dog we've ever bred, but we've had a few clients, when they get their dogs, they embark them. They just want to know what's in the genes. Is there anything in there? And so of the 3 or 4 that I've gotten reports back on, we have 0 diseases. So they test for 180 things. We've come back clear of all the dogs that we've had tested, have come back clear on 179 of them. They come back at risk for IBDD. Which is the back, where the backs will go out. Right. But they mark every dachshund, no matter where it comes from, at risk for that.
Which also, by the way, isn't always a super amazing indicator as to whether or not your dog's back is going to go out or not.
No, it's really not. I mean, because it all just depends on how those long backs, they bend a certain way, and sometimes they'll rupture that spinal fluid, and that's what causes that problem. And so, while outcrosses are good for genetic diversity, you could be bringing in disease from outcrosses that you don't even know. And so one of the things about, particularly the way we do it, between me, Bill, and Rich, we have 3 people there. And then the only people we've ever bred to outside of our own line has been dogs from Teddy and then dogs from Paul and Phil. And they've all stayed within these original lines too. So while at one point you look at it and you go, man, that's a lot of line breeding and / maybe inbreeding. But if the genetic line is pure, you're locking. So in other words, the only time inbreeding or line breeding is bad is if you have two dogs that have diseases and you're line breeding those diseases together, But if you have dogs that are fairly genetically free of disease, then in a lot of ways, the worst thing you can do is bring in an outside dog that might have those diseases in the compound. So that's the one thing we've noticed in terms of that balance of, is it line breeding? Is it inbreeding? For one, we've never had any two-headed puppies, so that's a good indicator.
Like 3 or 4 eyes and glowing and stuff.
I think when you hit that point, then okay, we went one step too far. We better take a step back.
Yeah.
But I think you lock out a lot of things as long as you have good genetics to begin with. You can, by staying within those lines, you can lock out a lot of bad things too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's two ways to look at it. But generally speaking, people will say grandfather to granddaughter. We've done a few father-daughter breedings. Turk, most famous dog probably in falconry, that I can think of anyway, was a aunt to nephew breeding, Obviously, you don't want to do that breeding after breeding after breeding. That'll cause some problems, But so for us, we've line bred a dog named Radar that we got from Teddy. He's been one of the dogs that we love. His size was good. Everything about him, this dog was good, And so we've line bred him heavily. So we would take him to almost every female that we had. But if you have a good genetic diversity in your females, then that's fine. And, you're essentially locking in those characteristics, but you get your genetic diversity through your females, because I'll breed 2 or 3 generations. Rich will breed 2 or 3 generations. Bill will breed 2 or 3 generations. And then we'll look how those all line up and be like, hey, you know what? That stud would line up good with what we have here. We're not technically going outside of the line, but they're like 3 generations away from each other now. And so same thing with Paul and Phil. I kind of look at them. Technically, I call them an outcross, but they're really not, because I think, to the best of my knowledge, have stayed within those original Teddy lines and Chuck Sprung lines. So when you think about the genetic diversity of, you had 3 dogs, essentially, Ice, Charlie, and Steffi, that formed all these dogs, essentially. But there was enough genetic variance there, once you get a few generations away, to where we've been able to breed back and forth to each other. And we've never had any problems, at least for the dogs that we've tested.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure, whatever, viewpoint you have on that might vary from state to state too, just whichever one you decide to live in, it's just a joke, people.
Yeah.
Just a joke. But yeah, no, it's funny though, man. Like, you're probably right. We're so used to kind of, for lack of better terms, anthropomorphizing, our way of life into like the animal kingdom, which is probably why a lot of the varying groups and issues that we have, with hunting and animals and everything kind of exist today. Mm-hmm. But genetic anomalies are genetic anomalies. And like you said, I was just curious personally, and you've done a really good job in outlining it, like kind of how many generations or how many, breedings you kind of have to do before you start kind of, repairing, reconstituting a little bit and stuff. And so, no, that's enlightening. I haven't really talked about that too much in this series yet. So I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit. And, did you have anything else to add to that, by the way, before we move on to...
It's one of my favorite topics, the breeding part of things. We're all falconers first and we're hunters first. But that's, I guess, one of the things I've really appreciated about my exposure with dachshunds is I really enjoyed just trying to put together good breedings. Well, let's see, what was my... so generally we're always thinking 3-4 breedings ahead. I did that breeding with Paul and Phil about 2 or 3 years ago. And already I've got like 3 generations in my head of what I want to breed. And then I want to bring in the Turk semen at some point. And so it's kind of interesting. The dog that I want to breed this AI to Turk doesn't even exist yet. I have to do the breeding that will make the breeding that will eventually be the breeding for that AI, And so I think, it's sort of like playing chess, and it's one of the funner aspects. I daydream all day long a lot of times about, boy, what would this dog, if I bred this dog to this dog, what would that produce? What would be the qualities? Oh, and then if I took him back to this dog, what would that produce? And so for us, it's about, so I'll just give you an example. One of the problems with getting smaller, and I've heard you kind of cover this with Casey a little bit, but one of the problems with getting smaller is you get smaller litters. Generally, when we first started, our dogs were 10 to 14 pounds, and we would get 3 to 5 puppies in a litter. Now we get 1 to 3 puppies. And generally, if we get 2, we're kind of happy, because as they get smaller, I mean, you're talking about a 5-pound bitch. She can't hold a litter like she used to. And so as an example for that, that's one of the reasons, one of the defining things about going to Paul and Phil's lines is, yeah, their dogs are a little bit bigger, but if you can keep a bitch out of that's say 8 pounds, and then you're breeding it back to a stud from our line that's 5 pounds, now you have a 5-pound stud going to an 8-pound bitch. She can probably hold 3 or 5 puppies. They're coming from good line tracking genetics, and then you're getting the small dog genetics put back in. And then the idea is, you want to compound on that, and maybe at some point you get to the point where all your bitches are a little bit bigger, just because you bred that in, I think Teddy pays pretty close attention to how many puppies are producing a puppy. Nobody wants 1 or 2 puppy litter, So, I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, but that's just one example of things that you're always looking 3 or 4 breedings ahead. And that's one of the things I've enjoyed most about breeding is I just want to really put the best dogs I can on the ground. And I enjoy the mental stimulation that gives me of trying to decipher that. What does this breeding look like, or what does that breeding look like?
Sure. Yeah. And I can see where, someone and that's why I thought it would be, cool to go ahead and incorporate you in this whole discussion, because, like you've touched on multiple times, is like the dogs that you all produce are for, even a kind of a little bit of a niche within a niche. And, it's important for people to also, and it's kind of already been touched on, and even some of the episodes that people haven't heard yet in this series, or may have yet by this point, I'm not sure yet. But I mean, there are drawbacks also, to, and other risks that are involved with, some of those different qualities. But overall, yeah, I mean, I think it's just important for people to kind of have some degree of understanding what all goes into the pre-planning that's involved in all of this. And, just because you think you might be able to match this with this doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the result that you think that you might be wanting or planning for.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but
it's really great to see how these dogs have caught on, though. And there's, new breeders that are trying their hand in them. They've gained an affinity for this breed too. And we all kind of need each other in a roundabout way. I mean, we wouldn't have gotten as far as we've gotten if it wasn't a team of me, Bill, and Rich. And so, and I think probably Teddy, she's got people around her that she puts dogs with, Paul and Phil, and maybe Susan Fuller and some others, and you try to keep them close. But what I really like to see is that new people are trying to breed dogs, and I think these dogs are best in the hands of falconers. We really seem to, because we use them day in and day out, falconers are really have an ability to assess these dogs and their field qualities more than maybe your average show person, or even some of your blood trackers and stuff. They're looking for one specific thing in terms of tracking. But I think these dogs have really done well in the hands of falconers, and some of the best dachshunds 20 years ago were nothing to write home about. They kind of gained in popularity after World War I. A lot of servicemen were bringing them back over. But when they were bringing them over, the appeal for the dachshund wasn't really in their hunting abilities. It was in their novelty of them looking like a wiener, And so they would breed them more for show than anything else. And sadly, over that 100 years, a lot of the good hunting qualities were just bred right out of them, just because they were more of a novelty than they were, or they appreciated for, their shape more than they were their hunting abilities. And so one of the things I can definitely say over the last 20 years or 25 years of doing this is the dachshunds in general in the U.S. have gotten a lot better. I remember we used to be able to go to field trials back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. We'd take these dogs we got from Teddy. I mean, you could literally, they'd jump the rabbit and you'd bring them up on the line. I mean, you could almost drop these dogs, spin them around as you're dropping them, just let them hit the ground, and they would find that line and just take it, and they would blow everybody away. But nowadays, I think a lot of people have done better breedings. I'm seeing more and more very good dachshunds at AKC trials that you didn't used to see that way. And now you got to really take your dog there kind of ready. And I mean, our dogs still do very well from those lines, from Teddy's lines. But it used to be, you didn't have to put much into them. They just had all that in their DNA and they would just blow through it. But nowadays you kind of gotta make sure your dogs are ready now that, and that's great for the breed. I'm glad to see that. It's not so fun when you get second place. You spend all that money and you travel all that way and you go home.
It is what it is. We kind of had that conversation a little while ago. I mean, the whole field trial aspect of things is a whole other avenue, and all of this that, you could talk forever on, but when in terms of its importance and relevancy to falconry, it really has none whatsoever.
No.
You know what I mean?
It's just something fun to do in the off season.
I understand the importance if you're wanting to breed your dogs or make them available to even possibly breeders that aren't necessarily falconers and stuff. Like, I understand that there's a measuring stick to some degree, but all that being said, it's not something that ultimately is going to make or break your dog as a falconry dog by any stretch. But that being said, like I said, I think, this conversation is kind of gone a little differently than some of the other conversations in this series, because like I said, I wanted to get, a lot more of like the historical aspect and stuff, because like I said, whenever we talked before on the phone, lining up this whole thing, it just seemed like you would be a good person to touch a little bit more on like the more intimate history, behind the breed and everything. But all that being said, I've already picked your brain a little bit about some of the other aspects of, dachshunds that I've touched on in some of these other podcasts, but I still do want to get your opinion and pick your brain a little bit on a couple of other things. And you've already kind of heard me talk about it a couple times. And, by the time people have listened to this whole series, it will have been covered ad nauseum. But you're another good source for the same couple of questions that I've been asking throughout this series. And that's important for people to hammer into their heads before they get into this breed and wanting to own this breed, that they understand. The main couple of questions I've been asking, as you've already heard, number one, and you touched on it very briefly at the very beginning of this conversation, but that's the housebreaking, the house training aspect of things. And I know you have a little bit different spin to offer on that with some of the different techniques that you use, but also when you think the best time in taking one of these puppies home is, and as a breeder yourself, I know you can probably add maybe similar, maybe a little bit different insight to that and stuff too. But that being said, go ahead and start off talking a little bit about your particular approach to the whole housebreaking aspect of things, or house training.
So this is one of the things where I met my wife about 14 years ago, and her background was in obedience training. So she had done a lot of show dogs, primarily golden retrievers, and obedience. Her aunt is a published author and has done several books on obedience training and stuff. And so Therese, growing up, was always involved in her aunt's business. She would go and clean kennels for her. And so over the years, she kind of got schooled on the obedience side of things from her aunt. And so when I met Therese, my background was all in hunting. Her background was all in obedience, but we had that natural connection, But one of the best things she ever did for me was taught me about equine pellets. Now, just a small caveat, dachshunds aren't really that bad for potty training if you only have one, and particularly females. Females, you can teach them, hey, you paddle them, rub their nose in it, just like any other dog, and they'll generally pick that up. The problem we run into as breeders is when you have males and females intact, obviously, the males are going to start marking at some point when a female comes in. And once the males start marking, the females will smell that in the house and figure, okay, well, I guess it's just he's doing it, so I guess it's okay. And then it can become a problem kind of quickly. So as a general rule of thumb, all of our males these days are outdoor kennel dogs. Now, we put a lot of money into our kennels. We have a insulated and finished and heated garage. We try to give our dogs the best life we can without them destroying our house, But the females, so equine pellets are pelletized horse bedding, and they smell very much like the outdoors grass and stuff. And so all of our kennels, we have a sleeping area, and then we have a general play area, which is, maybe 3 or 4 feet. And then we have a small box area where we keep equine pellets inside there. And so when you start them out in a small space, they learn, okay, I don't want to pee where my bed is. Don't really want to pee where I play. And so they just learn to go in the equine pellets. And so then as we breed dogs, those puppies are whelped in those same kennels. And from pretty much the time they start walking, they learn, okay, mom goes over here, so we should go over here. And so it's kind of interesting. We never have to train them or anything, but you could look at our whelping kennels, puppies that are 8 weeks old, and our whelping kennels are totally clean because the puppies have just learned to go in the equine side of things. And so where that's been beneficial then for house dogs is we can just keep a shallow tote, maybe like a bath pan size for a hawk, and we keep equine pellets in there. And our females particularly will just jump in there like a litter box for a cat, and they'll just go in there. And so it offers them an alternative besides your carpets, essentially. Yeah. They don't always scratch at the door like, hey, I got to go out. And, they're just small dogs. They have small bladders, and, maybe they're not. I don't think they've ever had a reputation for being the most intelligent breed. They're not like golden retrievers or German shepherds that learn very fast.
Well, I mean, what I've noticed with them is they have a special kind of intelligence. Mm-hmm. Like they're manipulative, and they're conniving. So like they will figure out their own methods on how to get what they want, mm-hmm. but it generally comes at a cost of whatever it is they have to go through to get what they want.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I think that they're more intelligent and less intelligent. It just depends on what your outlook is, but I think that overall that's
a good way to look at it. They're
pretty intelligent.
You could call them intelligent, but they just don't care.
Yeah, they're stubborn. I've made the joke before, man. They're German. It's the German mentality.
But there's just a little tip for people at home if you're struggling with the potty training. Particularly, it works well with females because they're squatters. The males, you might want to put a log in the middle of that tote. And then I think once they mark on that log a couple times, upright log, then they'll kind of go in there too. But it helps with our females. Our females are the only ones we actually bring in the house. So we'll bring in like 2 a night, and we'll try to rotate them, get them all family time and stuff. But like I said, we put a lot of money into our kennels. So we spend a lot of time out, kind of like you have your studio here all set up, your kind of man cave.
Yeah.
We have a 30 by 40 foot garage that we've set up like that. And me and Tree spend a lot of time out there watching TV, and the dogs can run around. So they get a lot of family time, but it's a balance. We had to rearrange our whole house in order to accommodate the potty training and, the problems that come along with it. So, but we also have 8 dogs. So if you have 1 or 2 females, it might be a minimal inconvenience, but usually once you get a male in there and then the marking happens, and then, it can spiral out of control relatively quickly. But we found the equine pellets really helped. And when she showed me that, I was like, wow. It's like, man, that changes a lot of things. I can probably keep like 3 or 4 more dogs now that we got that under control, So.
Yeah, it's a trap.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I as you know, I mean, you've seen both of my males today, mm-hmm. and everything. And like, so classic example, I get home. I saw both of them crap in the field earlier today when we were out, whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, it got them home. They both peed, then they do the deal where they just stare at you like, okay, can we go inside now? Whatever. Okay. I mean, sometimes you can give them a full 10 to 15 minutes, and sometimes it's that 16th minute that they'll decide, that they need to, drop a deuce out in the yard, mm-hmm. or whatever. All that being said, same kind of deal. I've made the joke before. Sometimes they save a Lincoln log back, just for no reason.
Yeah.
I mean, I was getting ready and getting stuff, kind of prepped and out here, and I go back in the house, and my wife's sitting down. Of course, she's not paying attention. She's got her face in her phone and stuff. So it's, like I said, it is what it is. But I'm getting ready, and I come back out, and she's just like, did somebody crap, and so the first spot I look is our rug in our living room,
mm-hmm.
And sure enough, there's like a, it's hard to tell. Sometimes, used to, we could kind of tell which one produced which turd, just because of the size discrepancy in the dog.
Sure, yeah.
Not so much anymore,
Yeah.
But yeah, somebody laid a nice little, present right in the middle of the rug or whatever. And And yeah, so I mean, you never know. Sometimes there's just no rhyme or reason, especially when you got, I mean, I don't know if it's because I got two males or because of just they're them or whatever. But, I mean, luckily the thing is when they do have accidents in the house, it's not terrible to clean up, assuming you don't have carpet or whatever. Yeah. And a rug, a rug's a rug, whatever. You can clean a rug if you need it. But anyway, like I said, I mean, as far as just that kind of thing goes, though, I mean, I knew that you had an interesting perspective on that to offer, because I don't think very many people usually equivalate kind of a, like you equivalated it to a litter box, you know? They don't really have that mentality, so to speak, when it comes to dogs. The closest thing I've seen to that is like, potty pads or puppy pads or whatever.
Yep.
And honestly, not a big fan.
Yeah.
Really not, because I mean, I've noticed a little bit better difference in my one dog that was consistently outside trained and stuff from the onset, as opposed to that kind of sort of allowance that was made more for the inside, mistakes, so to speak. It's just like, well, they're going to go inside anyway. Might as well just go ahead and let them on these pads or whatever. But even so, they're not always going to go on a pad.
Yeah, it's the only downside of the breed, really. Yeah. They're great in every other way, but that's just kind of something you got to kind of accept. But on the flip side of that, I mean, I don't know how other people, how big of an issue that is for other people, but it's well worth, to me, the increase in my game take to deal with that a little. And like I said, I put a lot of money into finding a way to minimize it in my house and keep it, isolated. But not everybody's, I'm a breeder, so I don't mind arranging my life around that. But a lot of people don't want to have to arrange their life around a dog, so to speak. So, but I guess the only thing I can tell people is it's worth it for, the amount of game those dogs will put up for you. Cleaning up a turd every once in a while, it's a minor inconvenience for me,
Yeah. Well, and there's the whole, we've already discussed multiple times here on the podcast in this series, the belly bands and stuff too for males, which, have been a godsend, for me and my two dogs, because, if it wasn't for those, good Lord. I mean,
maybe a combination between those on the males and the equine for the females might be the trick.
Maybe. I mean, they've done a world of a difference, assuming you've got the right size, maxi pad that goes in them or whatever. But that's a whole other, that's covered at some point in time, another or two. But anyway, so, I mean, all that being said, appreciate you offering that other viewpoint, with that, and, another, potential alternative for people to look into, especially if they have or looking to get a female. But I want to go ahead and transition to the whole when you think the best time to take a puppy home is, since you're a breeder, and a lot of people defer to the opinions or the expertise of the breeder when they're making that decision too.
Sure. Yeah. Generally speaking, I don't put too much emphasis on like what time's perfect necessarily. We don't generally move a dog before 8 weeks. We like them to be all the way weaned, and then we do our first vaccinations at 8 weeks. And so once they get their first vaccination, then we're ready to move them. But just as a breeder, obviously you want to keep the dogs that show a lot of promise. And so for us, I mean, we generally don't move any dogs until they're about 4 months old, but that's not for any reason other than we like to be able to evaluate the dogs. Because, I mean, the idea is you want to advance the line. It's not that we want to keep all the best dogs, but we want to advance the line so that the dogs that are getting away are consistently getting better and better and better as time goes on, because we're keeping the ideal dogs, whether it be for size or build or nose or whatever it is. So for us, generally, we don't sell any dogs till they're about 4 months old, because we want to have an opportunity to do a few drags with them, kind of get an idea of how big they're going to be, what their shape's going to be. And that's just more to fortify our breeding than any other reason.
Sure.
But 8 weeks, I think, is the minimum that I would ever let a dog go. And that's mainly because you want them to be fully weaned. And then obviously, once they're weaned, they're not getting their mother's antibodies anymore. And so we want to vaccinate them at usually around 8 weeks. just the puppy vaccinations. I usually don't do rabies till about a year old because that one's pretty strong vaccine, So usually that first year we're getting them started, we're doing drags, and then before they go in the field for their first real-time hawking, that's usually when we'll do rabies, just in case they tangle with a possum or a coon or something.
Sure.
So I guess that's the best thing I can say. Usually 8 weeks is the earliest I would do it, but then anytime after 8 weeks, I think, 8 to 10 weeks,
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's, I don't know, just from all the different people that I've talked to over the last handful of years, especially, there's a big difference also in difference of opinion versus like, bigger breeds versus smaller breeds and stuff like that too. Kind of I've heard more of a general consensus on, the smaller the breed, typically like, the longer they encourage to leave the puppies with mom before they, are brought home or go to their respective families and stuff. So it sounds like kind of what your preference is too. And especially like, we were talking a little bit about this earlier when we were hawking earlier, but I think there's a big difference too in, getting especially like a dachshund that's also bred, by a falconer or a hunter, and like you said, they've already been kind of trying to look at some of these other things, dragging a rabbit, doing this other stuff, maybe letting them, feed on or chew on a carcass or whatever, so they can already start getting that ingrained genetic drive, kind of going and stuff.
In my opinion, you want to do that as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Really at 3 or 4 weeks, we're putting carcasses in with the puppies and they're teething on rabbits. Like literally, they're not even a month old and they're cutting their teeth on frozen rabbit carcasses. And then, by 6 or 8 weeks, we're doing short drags, nothing big, 8, 10 feet. You just want to see, do they put their nose down? Do they show instinct? I love assessing a puppy that's between 8 and 12 weeks because everything that you're seeing, there's no learned behavior. Everything you're seeing is written on their DNA. Yep. So that's the prime time where you can really kind of assess a dog and be like, boy, this one's got it, or this one's maybe a little lackluster or whatever. So, because there's no learned behavior, it's just purely what's written in their genetics. So that's my favorite time to look at dogs and assess dogs is between like 8 and maybe 14 weeks, between 2 to 4 months. Now, a lot can be said for learned behavior. A dog that might be mediocre might be a superstar once they actually get out in the field and have another couple other dogs to show them the ropes and stuff. But, you can't keep them all for 2-3 years while you figure that out. So you got to be able to kind of look at them and make some initial judgments on them, when they're a little younger.
Yeah, well, for sure. And it makes a big difference when, at least having 2 dogs now that I kind of had to enter and get going 2 different ways because as we talked about earlier, one dog didn't come from necessarily a hunting breeder and stuff, and the other one but had good genetics, but the other one also had good genetics, and it was a night and day difference.
Yeah.
One was basically a whole year, almost a whole season ahead of the other. One was a lot better out of the gate. The other one took some time.
Yeah.
That being said, I wouldn't say they're exactly even now, but they're fairly close.
I thought they both did pretty good today. They were both trying hard, and and they had their nose down and they're working, and that's half the battle. That's half the battle.
Yeah, and they tend to grow into some of the other things, or whatever. But overall, it's a big, at least in my very limited experience, knowledge, and observation, and just seeing what I've seen so far.
Sure.
But like I said, it's there's a lot of things to consider whenever you're looking at these dogs. And, overall, I know one other thing I was going to ask you about too that I actually haven't asked yet, but this kind of came up recently because I was thinking about maybe possibly for a minute adding another dachshund. I need one like I need another hemorrhoid at this point, probably. That being said, I've got 2 males. And so for me, it's kind of almost like, depending on who you ask, I'm kind of damned if I do and damned if I don't, and damned either way. Because if I had another male, I've been told that, I increase the risk for fighting. And then if I get a female, well, good luck as far as getting them. I mean, they already mark, you know what I mean? And all that kind of stuff and the behavior with all of that, I just don't know.
Yeah.
I mean.
In my experience, males will generally get along fine until a female's introduced. That's when the fighting starts. So, I mean, your dogs seem like they get along fine, but do you remember when I got mine out, I said, Judge and this one or Jersey and Rooster they don't get along too good. And it all revolves around the females at that, I think, if you're asking for advice on that, or what I would do if I were you, if whole work isn't a staple of your falconry in terms of, or just tight places, whether it be under sheds or in pallets or holes or just rolled brush or whatever it is, if that's not a major consideration for your falconry, males are just fine. In my personal opinion, I think males actually are more driven. They have more stamina. Judge, my male, he'll go 8 hours. He's 10 years old and he'll go 8 hours and still be wanting to go at the end of the day. My females, they're still very driven, but they're good for about 4 hours. And then you kind of see like, maybe I'm kind of over it. So I think in my personal opinion, males are actually make better, just pure hunting dogs. The thing about the females, though, being smaller, they make the better whole dogs and tight space dogs. And so that's, I guess what you got to weigh. But if you don't have a lot of holes as a consideration, maybe just a male from our line, that would be like 6.5 pounds. It might be the way to go, if you need something smaller, like what most people will go for a female for, because they need a smaller dog. But females are going to be your better whole dogs, your better tight place dogs. And, but males, I think, are a little more driven, in my opinion. At least that's been my experience. People got different opinions. In beagles, people just want females generally. They'll go through 20 males, this one's not good enough. This one's not good enough, but females seem to be better. But my best dogs and the dogs that I rely on the most in the field are generally my males, whether it been Radar, Rooster, Roman. My females are all good for whole work and stuff, but I mean, I'd be hard pressed without Judge. He's been my main dog for the last 8 years, Well,
and he's the one we had to chase down towards the end today,
with the telemetry and stuff. Yeah, he's all business when we get out there. So you definitely don't want to run him without some kind of tracking,
Well, I mean, and what you saw today was a pretty good example. I mean, granted, yes, some of the other urban spots that we have, there might be an opportunity to get under a trailer or something here and there or whatever. We do have, times where we will try and get underneath sheds and things like that. All that being said, though, for the most part, whole work where we're at here, not huge importance or whatever. I was just looking into it because, there every so often, you get tempted by the dark side. And, sure. I've had, there's a couple of puppies that have come up recently that have fit kind of the mold and what I wanted for, I mean, it's kind of like dachshunds are kind of like Pokemon. You got to eventually get like all of them, right? You got to have like one of each coat, one of each whatever, and this, that, and the other. It's whatever. But, like I said, I think that, once again, differing opinions. I've had a couple people say, well, you're kind of asking for potential trouble if you introduce yet another male. Because, like, you saw my Vizslas. Both of my dachshunds are intact, both of my males. Both of my Vizslas are fixed. I've got one female and one male. And the only dogs that occasionally will spat in my household are Hades, my black and tan, and Blitz, my male Vizsla. Okay. Every so often they will spat. Not aggressive like one's trying to tear the other one's jugular out or anything. But they'll, get ferocious for a minute and then it's usually done. Right. Hades is usually pretty submissive. Horace is kind of more dominant towards Hades, all that being said, introducing a fifth dog in, so you got three dachshunds and 2 Vizslas, so on and so forth. I don't, like I said, for anybody else that I know that there's other people that I know that might or might not listen to this that just want a whole freaking fleet, and already do have a fleet of dogs.
It sounds like you're trying to find a way to justify getting another one.
It's not so much justify. It's just I want to make as educated of a decision,
Sure.
So that I can kick myself in the ass later if it ends up being the wrong one. But, also like just weighing the potential, pros and cons. Sometimes I overanalyze stuff too. And it's like, I'm an analyzer personality.
One of the ways I would, because when I first met Teresa, I think I had 3 dogs. And now I have 7. And one of the ways I would justify keeping each dog, I'd be like, well, honey, you got to think about it. 6 of these dogs eats as much as just one big dog and craps just as much as one big dog. So it's just like we have a German Shepherd. It's just broken up into 7 different pieces,
Right.
So that's how I would always try to convince, myself and my wife that we need more dachshunds,
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, me and my wife have already agreed amongst ourselves that we're not going to go large breed anymore.
Yeah.
Small breed is definitely the way for us to go from here on out. And especially for as long as we continue to live in this area. I have hunted successfully with, especially like my female Vizsla and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is our spots keep kind of shrinking, and the amount of spots that we have keeps shrinking. And so the amount of spots that I have to accommodate a bigger breed that's going to burn it out faster is they're just dwindling,
Yeah.
So from here on out, it's going to be small breeds for me for as long as I stay here in the Midwest, probably.
Sure.
And I do need a breed that, while I can, primarily try and chase out some of the rabbits and stuff that are starting to what seem like also becoming more scarce around here. I also want to be able to do squirrel too. And, both of those dogs will tree a squirrel if they see it. I mean, I've seen them do it.
That's been something surprising from the dachshunds. I've seen a lot of people that have, surprisingly, they make pretty good. They're a versatile breed, but I never really envisioned them as being for squirrels, but I've seen guys that their dogs will bay it. I mean, I guess with squirrel hawking, right? You just need a dog that'll sit at the bottom of the tree and keep the squirrel from coming down, right? That's the general idea.
And if it does hop trees, keep it over, like keep it from necessarily going 2 round, making a different hole on the ground. Or if it does hit ground, you've got at least another couple of shots to
some pressure on them
to snag it, and, whatever. That being said, I mean, I've done line drags. I've actually had them, see squirreled before. And actually, they will sit there at the base of that tree and just go nuts.
Yeah.
But anyway, not to digress, I just, was curious on your opinion on that because, once again, depending on who you ask, it's just like, well, you might be asking for trouble. Well, maybe not so much. Well, whatever, as far as just that goes.
For adding another dog?
Yeah, I mean, for especially, a male with already a couple other males.
So I would be careful with the big breeds. You said that the Vizsla and one of the dachshunds will quibble a little bit. Tyler Slayton could probably tell you a story about what happened to his dog. So that's my only caveat with large breeds and the dachshunds is the dachshunds don't know that they're 8 pounds. They think they're Rottweilers. And so if they challenge a bigger dog and that dog doesn't back down, then they have Napoleon, little man syndrome, they don't back down. And so it can sometimes not end well for the dachshund if you have a dog that's not very self-controlled, So, I mean, I guess it just kind of depends on, you got to be able to read your dogs. But, we've had Vizslas in the past, and they're wonderful dogs.
Sure.
We moved ours along, and he's still in the family. He went to a relative of mine, but mainly because they only have one speed. That was the problem. When we had our last baby, they're not very self-aware, I guess. They have one speed. At least ours wasn't, And
hence the point that I was making just a little bit ago. I mean, they burn out a spot real quick if you if it's small enough and you let them.
Yep. But I love the breed. They're great versatile dogs. And
sure,
if I lived out west or a place where we didn't have holes, Vizslas are very viable dog option, I think.
Yeah,
I love how they work closely. For a bird dog, they're generally not too far wide ranging if you don't want them to be. I mean, I'm sure if you train them on pheasants or upland, they'll get out there further. But they're always checking in. They're very in tune with the falconer. So that's one of the things. But it almost, I know some guys use Jack Russells and some guys use, I have a beagle, and the beagle's great. She's... you got to have the right tool for every job. So, if I could only have one, I'd have to take the dachshunds because they will get you to the rabbit the same way the beagle will, just a little slower. But particularly with the hawks, what I've noticed just in the difference between the beagle and the dachshunds, as just a general example, The beagles, the idea is you want to keep the pressure on that rabbit because rabbits never want to travel too far from home. So if you jump a rabbit in an area, he's going to run big circles, usually like a quarter mile, and he's always going to want to come back around to where he knows that habitat. But he also knows he can stay in front of those beagles all day. Those beagles will never catch him. And so he'll just keep running in circles. And so the way we try to hunt our beagle is we'll let her run a rabbit, and we have the GPS so we can look on there and we can see those circles. And then as we figure out the racetrack that the rabbit's using, we can slide in on that line. As the dogs or the beagle's taking it out, we'll slide in on that line. And then when she brings it back around, we're all just sitting on that line that rabbit's naturally running. And that's great. But what we've noticed is once the hawk takes a shot at that rabbit, if they miss it, now the rabbit knows, well, I can stay in front of those dogs all day, but now like the Air Force, so to speak, is here. They know that hawk will catch them if they keep running. So that's when they'll go to ground, they'll go to a brush pile. And if you don't have a dog that can get them out of that, you might as well just be standing there with a German Shepherd at that point, you know? And so that's if I could only have one, I love my beagle and she's great and she's valuable in the field. But if I could only have one, it'd have to be the dachshunds for me, just because once the hawks put pressure on those rabbits, they always go to ground. And, the thing about rabbits is, at least, where we're at, you might get them out of that first spot, right? Docs say they go under a shed. And so the dogs get under there and they flush them out and the hawk takes another shot. So now that rabbit, rabbits, they have like a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. So if you can run them through those plans, a lot of times there's not a plan D. They run out of plans. So if you can get them out from under that shed, they'll run and they'll go up to the next spot. Now they maybe they're into a hole, and you get them out of that hole and they'll run to the next spot. And now they're like maybe they're in the end of a metal tube or something, and it gets tighter and tighter each time. And generally by the third time you've flushed that rabbit, wherever he goes to,
it's not going to come back out.
You're not going to get him out, you know. And so the nice thing about the dachshunds is when you get them in, you can kind of, like today when we were working that brush pile, I said, well, maybe we can get along this side, try to cut them off from here. So as a falconer, if you can learn to play the field like you would in golf, kind of check the terrain and stuff, and you can put yourself in positions to cut off that plan B and that plan C, usually you can pursue, with a dachshund, you can pursue one rabbit until you catch him. And that's what we enjoy about it, for most people, when that rabbit gets to a hole, you got to go find a new rabbit. For us, that's when it gets fun. Now we got you right where we want you, because the hawks see that tail disappear into that brush pile, and they know what that means, that tail wagging, and it disappears in the brush pile. And we didn't get to see much of it today, but my three birds, they will all just come right over that because they know what's about to happen. And so the little dog comes in and the rabbit comes out, and it's like a magic trick, so that's really the benefit for us where we're at.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it's overall definitely a consensus that they're a good breed for, our type of terrain. And I mean, you can keep hearing it over and over again. I think that it's, it's kind of an unequivocal, agreed upon, type thing. It's pretty unanimous, that for certain types of things like what we deal with, there's really not a better breed for that particular purpose. But like I said, I'm glad we covered a lot of this other stuff because once again, there's other things that people need to keep hearing over and over again.
If I could just say about that, that's really where Teddy Moritz deserves a lot of credit, because when I was coming into falconry and right around that time, as she's starting to push these into there, nobody was using dachshunds. People had Jack Russells were the thing. Everybody had Jack Russells back then. And so to see them over the last 20 years become such a staple in falconry, I think that's one of the things I give Teddy a lot of credit for. She really took a dog that was unknown in falconry and got it to the point now it's one of the go-to breeds in falconry. And to see that happen over the last 20 years has been kind of fun to watch and be part of and get to participate in and see that, take on, over the years.
And it's nice to see it kind of, yes, breeds kind of come in vogue, and popularity, and it kind of waxes and wanes and stuff, but this breed's kind of cemented itself.
They've stuck.
Think. Yeah, for sure. But cool, man. Well, like I said, I'm glad we talked about all these other topics and stuff. My my case study with the whole house training and everything else has continued, and everything else, and it's kind of general consensus.
Whoever cracks that is going to go down in history as one of the greatest falconers who ever lived. Whoever figures out what the formula is for dachshunds and potty training.
It'd be like the Da Vinci of dachshunds, basically. Yeah. I mean, I think basically the only foolproof way is kind of the Teddy way, though. Going back to her again is just, and well, now your way too. I mean, just don't have them in the house.
Yeah.
There's that, but
kind of view them like livestock in a sense. I mean, we love our dogs and we give them the best life we can. Like I said, I put a lot of money into trying to give them the best life I can, but without having them destroy where I live, you know?
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Well, and we love ours. We love ours being in the house with us and stuff too. They're very loving dogs and everything. But that being said, they are hounds. They don't necessarily have to be in the house. They're not going to suffer if they're not in the house.
Yeah.
Too. So
yeah. They just need the stimulation.
Fair.
As long as you're hunting them, you're giving them the mental stimulation. If they're outdoor dogs, that's fine. Just don't stick them out in the kennels and leave them.
Right.
But as long as you're there, you're bringing them in, you're giving them, family time, or maybe the solution is you bring one at a time. We did that for a lot of years. We just bring in one dog at a time. But we're watching you, and you get time with the family and stuff. And particularly the females do better. They learn. It's just when you bring a male in, that's when things kind of get a little wonky on you. But if you just stick to females, you can have 2, 3, 4 females in the house. As long as there's no male to start the spiral, the chain reaction, then, they're not the worst dogs, I guess, in the world for potty training, but there's just a certain kind of formula you have to follow. And if you get outside of that, then it can go downhill pretty quick,
Well, if I ever decide to add another male to my other 2 males too, I'll let you know how my personal experience ends up going with that. But
give us a call. You might like one from us. Teddy's got a dog that she got from us. So, this was something something kind of interesting, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about the dog that Teddy got from us, because we're very fortunate. It's been a friendship that's been cultivated over the years and that we are really grateful for. Teddy actually texts us almost every week telling us, man, Kip did this and Kip did that. And it's really kind of nice to, a lot of people, Teddy's so famous, we're used to chasing her down. And so it's nice to have her calling us, but we love the stories she shares about Kip. And, this is just a little side note. One of the dogs we've always line bred was a dog named Radar that came from Teddy. And so when we got Radar from Teddy, Radar had come from a dog named Red Machine. And I'm not to offend anybody, I'm not sure who has Red Machine, but somewhere out there in New Jersey. But Red Machine had come from Turk. So when we got Radar, I kind of boldly asked Teddy, I said, would you mind if we put, because he comes down from Turk, if we put BlackHawk on his kennel name, and normally that's kind of left to the whoever bred the dog to put their kennel name on there, and Teddy was very gracious. And she said, okay. She goes, I guess you guys can put BlackHawk, Radar, Von Moritz. So 2 things about that. For one, it's not bad to have your name on a dog with Teddy, but she was very gracious in letting us do that because, most breeders, they want their own kennel name on there. So the fact that she did that was very nice. But then when she contacted us looking for a male, which is a huge honor, anytime Teddy contacts you, it's one thing to get a dog from her, but if she gets a dog from you, then you're doing something right, And she asked, well, do you mind if I put Von Moritz on this dog I'm getting from you, since it kind of comes from my line? So it's been really kind of cool to sort of be tied to her. Like we got a
reciprocal.
Yeah, but we got her named on a dog with Teddy, which is a real honor, really, But we love all the stories she tells us about Kip. And it seems like the size that we have has really been benefiting her out there, which is wonderful to hear. And it's nice to know because she plans on breeding Kip a lot. So, we'll have BlackHawk on all her pedigrees over the next year. It's just like Von Moritz is on all ours. And it really has been a friendship that we valued. And I think it's been good for both of us, maybe a little more for us, but so just a little shout out to Teddy. It's a friendship that the thing about Teddy is, whether you've known her for 20 years or 20 minutes, she has a knack for making you feel like she's invested in your falconry. She wants to see your dogs do well. And like you've known her forever, and she's very personable like that. And so she's been a great friend, and it's a friendship that we valued over the years, and we're very grateful for. So
for sure.
I guess I'll finish it off on that.
Yeah. No, that's all good, man. No, and she's awesome.
Yeah, she really is.
Really
she's
not much else.
She's in a class of her own, for sure. Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up then with one last favorite hunting story, and then your piece of advice, that you maybe like to pass on to people, and then we can call it good and go get something to eat. I know we probably got hungry people waiting on us.
Okay.
So,
Well, we were out today and we were working that brush pile and I smelled a skunk. I told Teresa, I said, just so you know, I'm getting a little whiff of skunk over here. And I told you I'd tell you the skunk story later.
Yep.
So when I first met Bill, this was Roman, my first dog that I got from Bill. And we were out hunting one day and we had about 3 or 4 dogs going, a couple hawks going. And Roman had disappeared at some point. I'm like, I don't know where he went. And so we're looking for him. This was before we really were hip to, GPS or telemetry or any of that. We were really running our dogs kind of reckless back then. But so eventually we kind of figured, well, I lost sight of him over here. And we kind of work our way back to where we'd seen him last. And we get downwind of this hill. And all of a sudden it just hit you. You could smell the skunk coming off this hill. I said, Bill, I think he might be in this hole right here. As soon as Bill walked downwind, he's like, whoa, it was strong. I don't know if people smelled skunk up close. I smell them on the roads every once in a while, and I kind of like the smell, anybody who kind of grew up in the 90s and maybe they know why skunk might smell appealing to some people, but from a distance.
No, not really.
You're not.
No,
okay,
no.
all right. Well, I'll tell you later. But so I've always kind of liked the smell, but it's when a dog is hit directly, I've always said this has got to be the most single best self-defense mechanism in nature. You can feel the air vibrating. Literally, you see the old Pepe Le Pew commercials and he's got the lines coming off of his tail. It's very true to real life. You can feel the vibrations in the air when you really get hit by a skunk, So I could tell Roman had gotten down this hole and he was down there for about 45 minutes. And I think he was not clean out under there because he'd gotten sprayed by a skunk, And so eventually he makes, after about 45 minutes, I see him come out of the hole and he just looks miserable. Eyes are all swollen. He looks like he's been through it, And so I didn't even want to touch him, I just put his box down. I said, load up, and he just walk of shame right into his box, And so meanwhile, Bill and Rich, they had left me to deal with that and they just kept talking across the street. So I stuck him in the back of my van and I had the back hatch open and every window and every side door. And I could still barely drive 100 feet or 100 yards to where they were. It was just so strong in the car. It's something to behold. Anybody who's smelled a skunk really up close or gotten sprayed, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, then it might be hard to put this together, but it's like I said, probably the most single best self-defense mechanism in nature. But my problem is I'm an hour and a half away from home. I'm down in Mishawaka. I'm from Kalamazoo area, and I have this dog, and I can't even drive 100 feet across the street, let alone get him all the way home. And so I get back over to Bill and Rich, and they see the dog, and they're like, whoa, And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got to drive an hour and a half home. I could barely even get over here without gagging and retching the whole way over here. And I said, so I think I need to go up to Walmart and get some tomato juice or something. That's what I had always heard. Now, this is like early 2000s. Again, internet's just kind of catching on. We didn't have phones like we do nowadays where I could just Google how to get rid of skunk spray, And so I'd always heard tomato juice. Bill, being a little older and having a lot of hound years, he goes, that doesn't work. He goes, that won't work. And I've always heard that works. No, that won't work. He goes, the only thing I know that'll work is douche. And I said, like Massengill douche? And he's like, yeah. And he goes, that's the only thing that'll cut the oil, I said, okay. Well, at this point, I'm desperate. I'll try anything. And I had a girl there with me, a friend, and I said, Casey, I need you to do me a favor. You need to go up to Walmart and we need like a dozen bottles of Massengill. She's like, I am not going through line with a dozen bottles of Massengill. Sorry, you are on your own, So me and Bill had to suck it up and we go and we cleaned them out. We took the whole shelf of douche, and it was so funny because, Bill's about 25, 30 years older than me, kind of an old hippie beard, kind of long gray hair. And me and him are going through this line, and the only thing we bought was douche. We didn't even buy a stick of gum or anything. So as this lady's ringing us up, she's like, beep. And every time she'd beep one of those across, she'd look at us like, what are these two guys up to? We got 12 boxes of douche and that's it. So every time she'd scan one, she'd just kind of look at us like, what is going on, But at any rate, we got back, we put it on the dog, and it worked. I couldn't believe it. It worked enough at least to get him home. I still could smell it 6 months later. So since then, I've learned that there's an old coon dog recipe of I think it's dish soap, hydrogen peroxide and baking soda, and this will cut through it and stuff. We didn't know that at the time. So if you're ever in a pinch, Mass and Gill Douche will get rid of skunk smell. It'll cut that oil, and I was able to get them whole. But that's why when I smelled that skunk today, my eyes kind of lit up. I was like, Treese, I'm getting a little skunk smell here because I did not want it. We're 5 hours from home today, so I did not want a repeat of that outing. So there's just a little interesting story for people if they care to hear that. No offense to any ladies. There's nothing against. I know it's a little uncouth, but it works.
It's all good. Now I know what the teaser is going to be at the beginning of your episode. Now, though,
how to get rid of skunk spray? Yeah,
well, that's awesome, man. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Let's go ahead and get your last piece of advice, and then let's go get something to eat, man.
Well, I don't know if I have a last piece of advice, but I would just like people to know out there, getting these voices down and getting to hear these guys that are kind of like staples of the falconry community has really been enjoyable for people like me. And I know a lot of my falconry friends get a lot out of it. And so just for people out there listening, I hope you guys appreciate what you're doing here. And you don't, as far as I know, you haven't been able to monetize this in any way. This is just something you do as a passion and to participate in falconry and to contribute something. And so I just want to say, I appreciate you having me down here, and we really appreciate what you're doing. I've gotten a lot out of these podcasts, and I think a lot of my friends and other falconers have too. So I just wanted to thank you for doing what you do at your own expense. So,
well, I appreciate it, man. And like I said, I appreciate guys like you too that are willing to come down and be a part of it. And, by the time people are listening to this, probably there's going to be some of the transitions that have already, kind of been in the process of occurring, but they will probably have officially occurred by the time this comes out. But all that being said, it's hard to think about what I would have, I know what I probably would have done, but like having this other purpose that's kind of popped up the last 5 years to take up another aspect of my life and fill another kind of, void. My goal isn't to make millions of dollars doing this, never has. And thankfully, because of people that, like you that have kind of come along and been supportive and everything, now it's to the point where it's close to being self-sustaining. I don't ever have aspirations of it being more than that. If it does, great. But if not, whatever. I'm just, the big reason why I continue to do stuff like this, though, is not only do I enjoy it, there is some degree of selfishness to it, but I appreciate guys like you that have sentiments like that. And for all of our fellow men and women falconers that get something out of the show, I appreciate it, and it's very kind of you to say. So I appreciate it. I'm still working on different ways of getting better about receiving compliments. It's still weird to me, but
all we ever want as falconers is to kind of leave our mark on things and try to contribute. And I think you're doing a great job with that. And
I appreciate it, man.
You're carving out your own space, I think. Yeah, I think this podcast is really, I know a lot of people appreciate it. So,
well, that's awesome. And I appreciate you as well. So cool. That being said, man, I think there's time now that we need to go get something to eat, have another beer, and just chill the rest
Let's
of the night.
do it.
Awesome, man.
All right.
Killer. Appreciate you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yep.